On a cold grey afternoon in late November 1970, a thick silence hung over Isdal Valley, Ice Valley, on the outskirts of Bergen, Norway. Locals had another name for this ravine, Dødsdalen, the Valley of Death, owing to legends of medieval suicides and more recent hiking mishaps. In this eerie landscape of mossy rocks and shadowed pines, a father and his two young daughters set out on a hike. The crunch of their boots on frosty ground was the only sound until a strange, acrid smell drifted through the trees. Following the scent, they stumbled upon a scene straight out of a nightmare, the charred remains of a woman's body lying among the grey scree and boulders. Her front was burned beyond recognition, yet her back oddly untouched by flames. Scattered around her were personal items, a broken umbrella, an empty liqueur bottle, jewellery, and a few plastic bottles, all arranged in an unnatural, almost deliberate way. Shocked and terrified, the family rushed down the trail to alert the police. Thus began one of Europe's most enduring mysteries. The victim would come to be known only as the Isdal Woman, after the remote valley that became her tomb. From the very start, investigators sensed something unsettling. Here was a woman with no identity, no purse, no passport, no labels on her clothing, nothing to say who she was. As detectives picked through the clues, they uncovered multiple passports under different names, coded messages, and a trail of aliases stretching across Europe. Who was this mysterious traveller, and what chain of events led her to such a grisly end in Ice Valley? In this episode, we delve into the shadowy case of the Isdal Woman, a tale of intrigue and secrets at the height of the Cold War. We will retrace her steps through 1970, examine the perplexing evidence and strange details left behind, and explore the leading theories about her demise. Was she an international spy caught up in clandestine missions? A victim of foul play whose death was staged to look like suicide? Or a desperate soul who went to extraordinary lengths to erase her own identity? By the end, the question will still echo. Who was the Isdal Woman? And why has her true identity never come to light? Half a century later, this case remains one of Norway's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. Timeline of events. February to November 1970, a mysterious traveller. Our story begins months before that fateful hike in Isdalen. Early 1970 finds a curious woman journeying through Europe under false names. According to later police reconstructions, she first appeared on the radar around 1st February 1970, arriving in Norway from Geneva. Over the next 10 months, this woman crisscrossed Europe, visiting cities like Paris, Brussels and Oslo, and repeatedly returning to Norway. She stayed in various hotels and boarding houses, each time using a new identity, at least 8 different aliases in total. For each hotel register, she concocted details, different names, occupations, and birthdays, yet curiously always claiming Belgian nationality. Some of her known pseudonyms included Geneviève Lancier, Claudia Thielt, and Elisabeth Lienhauer, among others. She often chose names that had a religious ring, saints, and biblical references, a quirk that would later influence investigators' hunches about her background. As she travelled, her behaviour raised quiet red flags. Hotel staff across Norway noted that this elusive guest often kept to herself, sometimes even switching rooms after check-in as if to evade scrutiny. She spoke multiple languages. Witnesses recalled snippets of German, Flemish and broken English, delivered in what some described as a Balkan accent. On occasion, she claimed to be an antiquities dealer or a travelling saleswoman, but carried odd items like wigs and eclectic clothing that hinted at roles far beyond a simple merchant. A hotel maid in Bergen remembered barging in to tidy the room and seeing the woman with a dark-haired man, a fleeting glimpse that only deepened the mystery of her associations. Others who encountered her noted a peculiar detail. The woman often smelled of garlic, a strong, garlicky odour that clung to her presence. It was an unusual trait that stuck in witnesses' minds, perhaps a clue to her diet or origins, or perhaps just another red herring in this maze of mysteries. November 1970, the final days in Bergen. As the year neared its end, the woman's travels brought her once more to the coastal city of Bergen, Norway. This time, it would be her final stop. In November 1970, she checked into several Bergen hotels under yet another alias. On the 18th of November, records indicate a woman using the name Elizabeth Lienhauer from Ostend, Belgium, stayed at Hotel Rosenkrantz in Bergen, likely a mystery woman. She stayed only a night or two, and a hotel staffer later reported seeing a mysterious gentleman visiting her room that evening, suggesting she wasn't entirely alone during her stay. Shortly after, she moved to the Hotel Horderheimen, registering under a different alias. Staff at Horderheimen would later describe her as attractive, about 5 feet 4 inches, 163 to 164 centimeters, tall, with dark brown hair and small brown eyes. They noticed she was guarded and cautious, staying mostly in her room as if she were afraid of something. She always paid in cash and insisted on anonymity. On November 23, 1970, the woman checked out of room 407 of the Horderheimen Hotel. She settled her bill in cash, then asked the receptionist to call a taxi. That taxi would take her to the Bergen railway station, and it was the last time anyone saw her alive for certain. What happened between November 23rd and November 29th remains the most confounding gap in the timeline. On November 23rd, after arriving at the train station, the woman stored 2 suitcases in a luggage depot there. Perhaps she intended to travel onward by train or to retrieve them later, we don't know. There's evidence she may have headed towards the area where she would die. A man later came forward claiming that on November 24th, while hiking on Mount Fløyen overlooking Bergen, he encountered a woman matching her description. She was in the company of 2 men in black coats and looked distressed, like she was about to say something to him, but the men gave him intimidating stares and the woman stayed silent. This witness, when he attempted to report the incident to police, was allegedly told, "Forget her, she's been taken care of," a chilling dismissive remark that only emerged decades later. Whether this sighting was truly the Isdal Woman or not, it paints a dramatic picture. If she spent her final days accompanied or captive, it could mean foul play. Alternatively, she might have been wandering alone in the wild after November 23rd. November 29th, 1970, discovery in Isdalen. 6 days after her Bergen hotel checkout, the story circles back to that fateful Sunday, November 29th. In the frosty midday light, police from Bergen, alerted by the distraught hiker and his daughters, arrived deep in Isdalen Valley. There, between the rocks and sparse brush, they found the burned body of an unidentified woman lying on her back. Her arms were bent at the elbows, hands clenched near her chest in a posture investigators recognised as the boxer position, common in victims of severe burns. The surroundings told a perplexing story. Scattered around the corpse was a collection of personal objects laid out almost like a morbid tableau. An empty bottle of St. Halvard liqueur, 2 plastic water bottles, a plastic passport cover, partially melted, a fur hat reeking of petrol, rubber boots, a scarf, an umbrella, a matchbox, a watch, and a few pieces of jewellery, a ring and 2 earrings. Much of this had been damaged by fire, but it was the placement that struck investigators as odd. It looked too orderly, ceremonial even, as one police report described it. Stranger still, every identifying mark on every item had been meticulously removed or scrubbed off. Clothing labels were cut out, any names or serial numbers on personal items had been effaced. Whoever this woman was, or whoever might have been with her, clearly went to great lengths to erase her identity. Police combed the immediate area for clues. One finding was immediately gruesome, but crucial. Beneath her body was a partly burned plastic cup, and amid the ashes were traces of paper, perhaps documents or a passport that had been destroyed in the blaze. No campfire pit or fuel canister was found at the site, yet the presence of petrol and the pattern of burning suggested an intense, controlled fire. The investigators had a terrifying puzzle on their hands. Was this suicide or murder? As the corpse was transported to Gades Institute for autopsy, the case was logged as Bergen Police Case 134/70 and an all-out investigation commenced. December 2nd, 1970, the suitcase clue. In the days immediately following the discovery, local police were joined by Norway's National Criminal Investigation Service, Kripos. While forensic experts in the lab worked to determine how the woman died, detectives pursued the question of who she was. A breakthrough came just 3 days later. On December 2nd, 1970, 2 unclaimed suitcases were found in a locker at the Bergen railway station, matching the claim ticket stubs found in the woman's purse. Inside these suitcases, investigators uncovered a treasure trove of cryptic clues. There were clothes, stylish yet ordinary, but again, all labels had been cut out. There were several wigs suggesting she often disguised her appearance, a comb and brushes containing traces of her dark brown hair, cosmetics and eczema cream perhaps to maintain a particular look or treat a skin condition. They found currency from several countries, Norwegian kroner, but also Belgian francs, British pounds and Swiss coins, evidence of her international odyssey. One curious item was a notepad filled with handwritten codes. When cryptographers worked on it, they cracked the code. It wasn't a cipher of espionage after all, but a simple shorthand for her travel itinerary, dates and places she'd visited. This was how police retraced her journey and discovered the web of false identities and hotel check-ins she had left across Europe. Among the papers was also a drawing of a mystery sequence of numbers believed to correspond to phone numbers or another code, though that remained unsolved. In a lining of one suitcase, cleverly concealed, detectives found a hidden stash of cash, 500 Deutsche Mark notes tucked away, a significant sum, about $130 in 1970. Perhaps an emergency fund or payment of some kind. And notably, one suitcase contained a pair of prescriptionless glasses with a fingerprint. When analysed, the partial fingerprint matched the dead woman's own, conclusively linking the luggage to the corpse. It was now certain the woman in Isdal had packed these suitcases herself. Yet no passport, no ID, no photographs were found among their contents, nothing that could directly reveal her name or origin. As these clues emerged, the media got wind of the bizarre case. Norwegian newspapers ran stories of the mystery woman of Isdal, and police, desperate for leads, released composite sketches of the woman's face based on witness descriptions and forensic estimates. These sketches circulated via Interpol across Europe, but even as leads trickled in, nothing concrete materialised. On December 21, 1970, the Bergen police held a press conference that left many observers unsatisfied. Citing the forensic findings, which we'll detail in a moment, and the lack of evidence of foul play, the authorities declared the case likely a suicide. The lead investigator announced that the Isdal woman had most probably overdosed on sleeping pills and set herself on fire in a final act of suicide. It was an explanation, but hardly a satisfying one. Even members of the police privately doubted its veracity in later years. Still, with no new evidence, the active investigation wound down. The case, at least officially, was closed just a few weeks after it began, leaving as many questions as answers. February 5th, 1971, a farewell without a name. With no identity and no family to claim her, the unknown woman was given a somber burial by the authorities. On the 5th of February 1971, in a quiet corner of Bergen's Møllendal Cemetery, police officers bore a zinc coffin containing the Isdal woman's remains to an unmarked grave. They chose a Catholic funeral service, reasoning that her use of saints' names on hotel forms implied she might be Catholic. 16 police officers attended as pallbearers and mourners, a respectful send-off to a life they could not identify. In case any relatives ever came forward, the ceremony was photographed and the coffin's zinc lining would preserve her remains for possible exhumation. As the winter rain fell on the rows of tombstones, the Isdal woman was laid to rest without a name, her grave marked only by a number. But her story was far from over. 1970s to 2000s, dormant but not forgotten. Although officially labelled a probable suicide, the Isdal Woman case refused to fade away. Over the decades, bits of information and tantalising anecdotes surfaced. In 1971, Norway's NRK network aired a TV appeal with the composite sketch, hoping someone might recognise her, but no one did. Rumours swirled. Was she involved in a spy ring? Was her death a covert assassination? In 1991, a taxi driver belatedly claimed that on November 23, 1970, he had picked up the mystery woman, and intriguingly, she was joined by a second man who rode with them to the station. In 2005, that Bergen man came forward with his story of seeing her on a hillside with two southern-looking men on November 24th, the report that earned him an ominous "forget her" warning. All these retrospective clues suggested that the truth of her final days might have been covered up or missed entirely by the initial investigation. 2016 to 2019, cold case reopened. Fast forward 45 years. In 2016, the Norwegian police and media rekindled the investigation with modern technology. NRK, Norway's public broadcaster, launched a multi-year inquiry in collaboration with the BBC World Service, determined to chase old leads and apply new forensic techniques. They commissioned fresh forensic artist sketches of the Isdal Woman's face using advanced techniques in the old morgue photographs. These updated portraits were shown to aging witnesses and broadcast internationally, a renewed call for recognition. Then in 2017, a scientific breakthrough, technicians performed a stable isotope analysis on the woman's teeth. Fortunately, her jaw and teeth had been preserved since the autopsy. Isotopes, traces of elements absorbed from food and water in tooth enamel, can reveal where a person lived in childhood. The results were fascinating. The isotope ratios suggested our mystery woman was likely born around 1930 in or near Nuremberg, Germany, but spent her youth farther west, perhaps in France or along the France-Germany border region. This aligned eerily with analysis of her handwriting, which experts thought showed French education influences. She may also have spent time later in life in a more southern locale. Her dental work was of an unusual style that might have been done in Central or Southern Europe, or even East Asia or South America. These findings sketched a rough biography, possibly a woman of Central European origin, growing up amidst the turmoil of 1930s to 40s Europe, bilingual or trilingual, who by 1970 was living a transient, secretive life. In 2018, NRK and BBC released an investigative podcast series titled Death in Ice Valley, which captivated millions of listeners worldwide. The podcast brought to light interviews with witnesses long silent and experts re-examining evidence. It even crowdsourced leads. One listener discovered an old newspaper photo of a mysterious woman on horseback in France, 1970, that might be our Isdal Woman. Forensic genealogists also extracted a DNA profile from the woman's stored organs and tissues. While a full identification through DNA has proven elusive, no exact matches in databases yet, they did determine her mitochondrial DNA haplogroup points to maternal ancestry in southeastern Europe or southwestern Asia. There was also evidence she possessed or used a French passport at one point based on an unclaimed French name on a flight manifest corresponding to her travels. 2019 brought a tantalising personal lead. An older man in Forbach, France heard the podcast and contacted the team. He claimed that in summer 1970 he had a brief romantic relationship with a woman who spoke several languages and had a Balkan accent, details uncannily close to our Isdal Woman. He even produced an old photograph of her riding a horse. Could this be the first known photograph of the Isdal Woman in life? The image was scrutinised and shared, but conclusively proving the woman in the photo is the Isdal Woman has been difficult. Still, it provided a possible glimpse of her living persona: confident, cosmopolitan, fluent in many tongues, yet holding secrets. From the discovery in 1970 to the modern investigations, the timeline of the Isdal Woman is filled with puzzling gaps and international intrigue. Each new piece of evidence seems to answer one question only to raise a dozen more. Little-known facts and oddities. Beyond the main narrative, the Isdal Woman case brims with peculiar details that often surprise even those familiar with the case. These tidbits add depth to the mystery, showing just how many unusual nuances surround this story. The garlic mystery. One of the more curious anecdotes is that multiple witnesses, from hotel staff to a taxi driver, recalled that the woman had a strong garlic-like smell about her. This wasn't just a faint whiff, people described it as if she had perhaps been eating raw garlic or garlic pills regularly. In 1970, Norway, a garlic odour would be unusual enough to be memorable. Norwegians weren't heavy garlic eaters at the time. Some have speculated this could mean she was taking garlic pills as a health supplement, or it might hint at a cultural background where garlic was prevalent in cuisine, perhaps Eastern or Southern Europe. It's even been floated that garlic could be used to mask other odours, say of chemicals or poisons, or that it was a sign of someone nervous. Garlic was at one point thought to have calming medicinal effects. It's a strange little fact, not exactly a clue that cracks the case, but an odd signature that made those who met her remember her distinctly. Elaborate dental work. We touched on this earlier, the Isdal Woman's teeth and dental work were not typical for a Norwegian of her age. In fact, the forensic dentists noted a number of gold crowns and root canal work that were of a style seen more often in Central Southern Europe or even East Asia, but not common in Norway at the time. This was such a key identifying feature that during the autopsy, the Bergen police removed her lower jaw and preserved it, hoping it might one day be matched to dental records elsewhere. For decades, her jawbone sat in storage as a macabre piece of evidence, occasionally shown to visiting dental experts. In the early 1970s, Interpol even circulated details of her dental work to dentists worldwide, thinking someone might recognize their own handiwork. While that effort didn't yield an identity, it did later allow the stable isotope tests in 2017 that gave us clues to her origin. It's a reminder of how forensic foresight, saving part of her remains, ended up providing answers nearly 50 years later. Forget her, she's been taken care of. This ominous line was reportedly spoken to a witness in 1970 and only came to light decades after. The story is that the 26-year-old man who claimed to have seen the Isdal Woman on November 24th in the hills, the one where she was with two men and seemed about to speak, was uneasy enough to go to the police back then. According to him, the officer or person he spoke with told him essentially to drop it, saying the case would never be solved, and using the phrase "glem henne hun ble ekspedert" in Norwegian. Translated, that's forget her, she's been taken care of. The phrasing "taken care of" or "expedited" as another translation is chilling. It implies someone handled the woman in the way one might speak of a problem being eliminated. This raises suspicions of a cover-up or secret knowledge. Was this just a dismissive cop annoyed with a possibly unreliable tip? Or did it hint that some in authority knew more? Perhaps that she was a spy and her death involved intelligence services, hence acquired instruction to not dig further. This quote, revealed in a 2005 newspaper interview with the witness, has since become famous among followers of the case, encapsulating the frustration and intrigue of the Isdal Woman mystery. A ritualistic crime scene. Investigators at the time were struck by how strange and staged the death scene looked. As mentioned, they described the display of objects as almost ceremonial. The fact that her watch was found not on her wrist but placed beside her, its hands stopped at 10:10, and interestingly, it looked brand new, as if it had never been worn or used, made them wonder if this was symbolic. In many watch advertisements, clocks are set to 10:10 because it's aesthetically symmetric. Did she or someone stop it at that time on purpose? The position of the jewellery, not worn but laid next to her, and her having no clothes on the upper body, only a partially burned synthetic blouse clung to her, gave an impression almost like some macabre ritual or final rite. Even the way the empty bottles were placed near her and how the labels were removed from every item seemed methodical. Typically, suicide scenes are chaotic, desperate, or leave some note. Hers was meticulous and cryptic. One pathologist commented it was as if she was arranged like a still life. This has led some to draw parallels to other unsolved cases with staged elements, like the Tamam Shud Somerton Man case in Australia, where labels were also cut off clothes. Was this a personal ritual where she shed her identity, or the careful work of someone obscuring evidence? It remains one of the eeriest aspects of the case: preserved remains and modern science. A little known fact is how much of the Isdal Woman was quietly preserved for future analysis. Not only was her jaw and teeth saved, but tissue samples of her heart, lungs and liver were carefully kept in formalin from the original autopsy. These sat in the archives of Haukeland Hospital for decades. It was these old tissue samples that allowed modern DNA analysis. Incredibly, in 2018, scientists managed to extract a usable DNA profile from her nearly 50-year-old organs. It's rare for unidentified bodies from that era to have had such foresight in preservation. Additionally, her unmarked grave was chosen in part so that exhumation would be possible. The zinc coffin did its job in preventing the body from decaying quickly. Indeed, in the early 2000s, the case was briefly considered for exhumation to test DNA, but once they realised they already had tissues, they used those instead. Another interesting tidbit: even though she was buried in 1971, her jawbone was never interred. It remained at Gates Institute and was later transferred to Oslo for the isotope work. So in a sense, parts of the Isdal Woman have been travelling even after her death, aiding forensic breakthroughs. The isotope test and DNA genealogy efforts are still ongoing. While no name has been attached to her yet, genealogists are building family trees from her DNA that could one day lead to a match. This use of preserved remains exemplifies the intersection of old mysteries with new technology, giving hope that maybe one day this Jane Doe could get her real name back. As we conclude, we're left with some haunting unanswered questions. Who was waiting for the Isdal Woman on that last taxi ride? Did someone accompany her to the station or beyond? What was she carrying in those papers that were burned? Perhaps secret notes or a diary? And what secrets died in that fire? Why did no one ever report her missing? Did she truly sever every tie to family and friends? Or was someone out there quietly wondering about the woman who never returned? And ultimately, who was she? Not just her name, but her story. Was she a pawn in a greater game, or the author of her own tragic ending? The Isdal Woman's tale endures because it sits at the intersection of fact and enigma. It teases us with just enough clues to speculate endlessly, but with crucial pieces forever missing. As of today, in 2025, she is still unidentified, a case number and a nickname, a ghost that lingers in the Norwegian memory. Bergen locals and avid true crime followers alike still talk about her, and visitors to Bergen sometimes hike into Isdalen, standing in the spot where that scorched mystery was found, pondering the questions that linger in the crisp mountain air. In the end, the Isdal Woman is a reminder of how some secrets manage to keep themselves. Her story invites us to imagine a life we'll perhaps never fully know. A woman travelling alone through the Cold War landscape, fluent in languages, fluent in deception, carrying her secrets to a fiery grave in Ice Valley. Until the day new evidence emerges, if ever, the Isdal Woman remains an enigma, a cipher without a key, a question without an answer. And so we leave you with that final, enduring mystery. Who was she and what chain of events led her to die in that desolate valley? Over 50 years later, the woman with no name still haunts us. A spectre of Isdalen beckoning us to uncover her truth, even as she keeps it inscrutably veiled in smoke and ash.